New York Cabernet Franc. Really excited for this one. We got a brilliant flight of wines, and I love this grape, so I'm happy to be here. Cabernet Franc is grown and vinified in most of the state's major AVAs. The quality level achieved across the different regions has established the grape as a flagship red variety. It has received national and international acclaim from all corners of the trade, and we believe the potential of this grape to be infinite, right? And with the flight that we have today, we hope to show the varying styles, approaches, and terroir that make New York Cabernet Franc so special. So just our New York State map, I'm sure everyone's quite familiar, but you know, Cabernet Franc does thrive in our major regions, the second most widely planted vitis vinifera grape in the state, and particularly popular in the Finger Lakes, the Hudson River region, Long Island, Niagara, Lake Erie. You can find it really just about everywhere. What's exciting is you're really getting different climatic influences from all of our different regions. So you're getting different styles, different qualities to this grape. And it is an exciting grape in the sense that there's not just one way to do it. And so that's going to be really evident in our flight today. We have the maritime climate of Long Island, you have your continental climate of the Finger Lakes, and then your cool climate lake effects with Niagara, with Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And so really exciting grape. I think that what we're seeing is the popularity on the rise. I think that's pretty evident, not just for New York State Cabernet Franc, but for the grape in general worldwide. I think it's becoming more popular. It's certainly more prevalent in trade circles, particularly here with me in London. It's kind of the belle of the ball. So yeah, really thrilled to be able to showcase that with you today. Let's press on. Okay, just a really basic overview of the Cabernet Franc grape, and so looking at its origin, Southwest France, colors medium ruby. Cabernet Franc is well suited to a cool climate, producing fine red wines that are light to medium bodied with a vibrant acidity and firm tannins. It also produces fruity and aromatic rosés and may be used in red Bordeaux style blends. Among other things, you'll find it vinified as a white wine, occasionally small bits here and there, but it's always a fun project. Traditional flavors that you're going to find in Cabernet Franc: red berries, strawberry, raspberry, more wild kind of bramble fruit, and then a very kind of signature bell pepper note, otherwise called capsicum, and that is from a chemical compound called pyrazines that are quite present in that grape. And depending on your winemaker or your grape grower, a combination of the both, depends on how prevalent that bell pepper note is going to be in the final resulting wine. And we'll talk about how kind of different winemakers have treated that as we go through our flight today. I think that some people really lean into it, and certainly if your fruit comes in underripe, you'll have an abundance of your bell pepper characteristic. But if you manage your vineyard appropriately, you can balance it out really well. I don't like it personally when the bell pepper is completely out of the picture. I think it is a varietal signature of the Cabernet Franc grape and should not be completely discarded. I think it's really fun when you have a very fruit-forward style, like most of our New York State Cab Francs are, but then a little whisper in the back end to let you know that this is Cab Franc and proud of it. And so, yeah. Cabernet Franc is the parent grape variety to several grapes, but particularly Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And so it's funny that both Cab Sauv and Merlot have certainly taken international spotlight away from the daddy grape, but it's an important one for sure. Again, your principal AVAs, Finger Lakes, Hudson River region, and Long Island, and we are talking vitis vinifera. Next week, I've got sparkling wines for y'all, and then following that, we'll talk hybrids. And so, Kareem, I wanted to pick your brain. We could dig a little deeper into this grape, but also I thought we should just start out with a bit of an introduction to your experience with the grape, how Palmanock and Palmer work with it, and what do you think? Do you like it?
Yeah, we love Cabernet Franc on Long Island. Long Island for many decades has been celebrated for Merlot, but in the last couple of decades, I would say Cabernet Franc has really risen along with Merlot to be, regarded as one of the premier red varieties to grow here. And, this time of year in early May is when we have the start of our growing season. And you always see it in the vineyard. Cabernet Franc is one of the first to bud out, to have bud break. And the point is, it really thrives in the vineyard and produces, a wonderful crop that you can, as you already said, Dan, you can produce a whole range of wine styles with it, not just red wines, but rosé, sparkling rosé. We even have a late harvest Cabernet Franc that was made by my predecessor at Palmer, by Miguel Martin. It definitely has a place here. And I can get into a little bit more like how we stylize the wine, in particular with regard to the viticultural practices and how they impact the pyrazines.
Well, yeah. How many? I mean, and we could save the I assume this was the 2019 that we have today to share is the kind of flagship style, right? And so we can kind of save that for when we tackle it. But if you are producing kind of other cuvées with it, we'd love to hear about it.
Okay. Well, I mean, on Long Island, we have many things in our favor with our terroir. It's a maritime climate, and it's a prevailing cool maritime climate. And we have a long enough growing season to fully ripen the crop. However, one of our perennial challenges that we have is the humidity that we see every summer. And so the point I'm getting to is part of our viticulture for decades now has been to engage in a very sort of aggressive leaf removal practice where we strip the leaves in front of the fruit to very deliberately expose the fruit to the elements, to the sun and the wind, so that the fruit can dry out much more readily. And the opposite is true. If you didn't do that, it would harbor disease, be a much more favorable environment for powdery mildew and downy mildew. And so by stripping the leaves, the fruit will dry out more readily, and it'll be less hospitable to disease. And so it turns out, so we had been doing that for many years before we learned, thanks to a study by Cornell University, where they showed that the practice of leaf removal was very much correlated to an acceleration in the depletion of pyrazines. So what does that mean in plain English? It means the concentration of those pyrazines is less than it would have been had you not done that. And so we're effectively stylizing the wine right here in the vineyard. And when I'm doing tours out in the vineyard, I always use that as an example of how we make the wine in the vineyard. And because it is very dramatic wine style impact from this viticultural practice. And so, like you were saying earlier, Dan, like that resonated with me, where you described the impact of the pyrazines, sort of, if you are able to manage them and lower them, but still have some sort of use the word whisper. I like that, where you still have this note of bell pepper, jalapeno, whatever it is that identifies as Cabernet Franc. It's still there, but it's not as pronounced as it would have been. And so I think that makes for we think it's a more attractive style. For us, it's been a successful style. But I just think it also allows the wine to be a little more complex, because whenever you have one aroma or flavor that's so pronounced, it dominates all the others, right? And so by dialing it down, now you have this, you have it on the slide right now, these other characters, the bramble fruit, the raspberry, strawberry notes that might have otherwise been dominated by the pyrazines.
Sure. I like when folks talk about that pepper quality as jalapeno, because it's actually one of my favorite red wines to pair with Mexican cuisine, If I'm doing like a taco night or a nacho night here, I think I always think to go for a nice bottle of New York Cab Franc. It really is like a like kind of pairing, and works well. The tannins aren't, so high and intense typically, where it's gonna kind of strip your palate and then set you up for failure with spicy food. And so when you have especially these more juicy styles, it can be a real winner for sure.
And the acidity too.
Yeah, and the acid, absolutely. It is really a great pairing grape. I think that acid structure. I apologize, my espresso machine is resetting itself in the background. I meant to turn that off. Sorry. Yeah, I think the acidity is hugely important from a pairing perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, but generally higher in acid than Merlot and Cab Franc.
I think it can be. I think the main point is that New York is a cooler climate, and we're more likely to retain that acidity.
Yep. And so for you on Long Island, you said bud break is fairly early coming for this grape. When do you expect to see that generally, and when was it this year?
So, on Long Island, bud break historically has been around the first week in May or end of April. And this year it was quite early. It was sort of mid-April. This is what you expect with climate change. I mean, you're seeing it all over the world. There are earlier and earlier bud breaks. But the last several years, we were kind of in a normal window because we had cooler springs. But this year we had a heat spell earlier in April, or it's very warm, and that really helped accelerate things. And so we are a couple of weeks ahead, which can be a good thing. So long as you don't get a subsequent frost, you're actually getting a head start on the growing season. And so knock on wood, we think we're in the frost-free period now. Good,
glad to hear that. And you guys don't really stress about really extreme winter temps for these grapes out on Long Island, yeah?
That's right, not anymore. When my parents first bought our farm here in 1983, that was very much a concern. In fact, I grew up in Connecticut, and my parents had relatives in New Jersey, and so we looked around the tri-state. My parents looked around the tri-state area, looking for a farm to start a vineyard, and they concluded that the Eastern Long Island was the place they wanted to be, because we have the benefit of the maritime climate, which really helps moderate the extremes in the winter and in the summer. But at that time, in the early 80s, there had only been a few years before where it had gotten really very cold. I believe as cold as -10, -15 Fahrenheit in the 70s. And so that's sort of the limit for a lot of these vinifera varieties. But in the last 5-10 years, I can count on one hand, the number of times it's fallen below 0 Fahrenheit. And so, or at least in the last 5 years, I don't think it's been more than a handful of times. So again, this is one of the things with climate change that, yes, we're feeling more and more confident that that's not so much a risk anymore.
And generally, do you have a target for an alcohol level, generally speaking? Is it something that is just totally dictated by season or by vintage?
Well, I mean, it is, but I mean, typically you can try to control that to some extent by picking earlier if you wanted to produce, if you didn't want to hit it. But high alcohol historically has not been our problem. So we for this wine, from Pamanac to 2019 Cabernet Franc, we're usually aiming for 12.5. Right. Sometimes it'll hit 13 or go over 13. In 2010, a very hot vintage, I think we got up to closer to 14, like 13.9, because it was just such a ripe vintage. But it's usually in the sort of 12.2 to 13.2 range.
Great. And and that sounds like a good sweet spot for balance.
Yeah.
Let's move into our next slide here, which is, more of kind of what we're talking about. We're going to, just kind of touch on some of these points again as we continue on. But viticulture wise, generally speaking, the grape is moderately vigorous with small to medium clusters, thinner skinned, earlier ripening, and lower in acid as compared to Cabernet Sauvignon. Late and uneven color development are common, leading to red wines that are lighter in color and tannin. It's funny. I generally don't think of it as lower in acid than Cab Sauv, and I'm looking at my notes here, which obviously I've pulled from the reputable sources. But for me, I always just think of it as a fresher style wine and more approachable for that reason. And so interesting. And then do you find that the color development to ring true for you, or is that we're talking more of our kind of marginal climates up in the continental?
So I mean, here on Long Island, anyway, we see sort of all of the above. We definitely do see that sometimes the color development is sort of lacking, and I think it also has a lot to do with which clone we're talking about. And so we've noticed over the years, because we have various clones planted, and some clones are just not going to ripen as well as others, especially with regard to color development. And so those have been sort of designated for use for rosé.
Okay, good.
And then it becomes very much a question of the vintage. In the riper vintages, we're getting really great color in the Cab Franc. And then in a lesser vintage, not as you would expect, the color intensity is not quite as intense. And then we work with blending with Merlot, Cab Sauvignon. We also grow Petit Verdot to help sort of if we want to make an adjustment with color, but it's not like there's only been a handful of years where I've sort of been really sort of concerned about the color. And one year in particular, that was 2011, where we had a really wet vintage, and that ended up being a style that was a very light style, both in body and in color, but it ended up being a successful wine. Eric Asimov from the New York Times recommended it for Thanksgiving that year, so it was
love New York State Cab Franc for Thanksgiving pairings. Yeah. Absolutely should be on every Thanksgiving table without a doubt. Yeah. Good transition into kind of vinification notes. As we've said, can be produced as a single variety, red, rosé, and even white wine. It's also used in our Bordeaux style blends, which can sometimes be labeled Meritage, the Meritage Alliance. And then from an aging perspective, oak barrels commonly used. However, fresher styles using stainless steel, concrete, or amphora are gaining in popularity. And so, Kareem, tell us about, once you get those grapes into the winery, what's your preferred approach?
I mean, so the way we do it at Paumanok and Palmer, we've been doing this for many years at Paumanok. We're very my father and I are very big believers in the wine is made from the grape, not other things like stems and whatnot. So we go to great lengths to remove the stems and any kind of mog. So we after harvest, when the fruit arrives at the winery, we sort it. We now have a mechanical sorting machine, followed by hand sorting before the fruit gets transferred into a stainless steel tank, where we do a variation of a pump over, a délestage, or rack and return. We do that on a daily basis once the fermentation is going. And and then we ferment to dryness, and then we press. We don't do any extended maceration but we ferment relatively cool. We rarely, it's fermenting like in the 60s, 70s, rarely gets warmer than that. And so that can sort of prolong the fermentation, obviously. But that yields a style that's sort of, bright, fruity, but we feel like we're extracting enough color and tannin. And then after alcoholic, when we drain the free run and then press off the skins, at that point we're handling it as gently as we can, where we evacuate the skins from the tank, by hand, and then we forklift it over the press. So we're using gravity at that point, being mindful of the alcohol soluble tannins that we'd rather not extract, to try to keep a more subtle um, svelte tannin structure.
Excellent. Our third panel here, we've got the 2011 acreage from the last USDA report. We're pretty supremely confident that over the last 12 years, the acreage has increased across most of these regions, if not all of them. But we were looking just under 500 acres as of that survey. And hopefully we'll get some updated numbers for us soon. Just a few more kind of notes that I have here that I thought to share. I was speaking with winemaker Kelby Russell from Red Newt Cellars, and he just noted that Cab Franc is what he believes to be the single grape that unites all of New York State's regions, particularly the Finger Lakes and Long Island, perhaps better than Riesling. Yeah, and so two very different regions, 4 hours drive apart, distinct weather patterns, continental and maritime. But given the grape given the grape's winter hardiness, it's doing better in its cool climates than across the pond where Bordeaux's heat spikes are really kind of troublesome for that grape. And in terms of its hardiness, it's actually quite wonderful compared to many Vitis vinifera grapes. We recorded in inland New York temperatures at negative 30 degrees Celsius, and yet more than half of the planted Cabernet Franc vines survived. So again, really happy with its winter hardiness, especially when we're managing it correctly with hilling up and things like that. And so we can survive our winters with proper vineyard management. We can survive our humid summers, and the results are pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree with all that, and I'd echo what Kelby said. It does seem to have become the variety that you find doing well across the state of New York.
Mm-hmm. You happy about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's my father and I have never been fans of hanging our hat on like a single variety, but we're happy to celebrate Cabernet Franc.
Good. Glad to hear it. Eric Asimov, New York Times, said most consistently good and distinctive reds that I've had from the Finger Lakes have been Cabernet Francs. A clear profile of Finger Lakes Cabernet Franc has emerged, and these wines were pale in color, savory and spicy, more than sweetly fruity. And indeed, the fruit flavor tended more towards the tart end of the spectrum, leavened with herbal and mineral touches, exactly what we're talking about. These wines spoke plainly of cool climate viticulture, a phase often brandied about by regions that have little claim to it. Yet it is a true description of conditions in the Finger Lakes, where alcohol levels only occasionally rise above 13%, compared with 14 or 15% regularly seen in California. The best Cabernet Francs were light to medium body with almost delicate textures and lively acidity. And he goes on to say the sort that would go especially well on the Thanksgiving table. Very good. October 2021, Decanter Magazine, Charles Curtis, MW, rates some of the outstanding wines from this cool climate state, and over a half a dozen Cabernet Francs made it to the top of the list. And so, again, we're seeing a significant increase in popularity, in press, in trade interest, and therefore a significant increase in plantings as well. When folks come into the tasting room, do they expect to see Cabernet Franc? Do they need hand holding with Cabernet Franc still? What's your kind of average consumer take?
It's a little bit of both. There are certainly those consumers who are sort of aware of who are into wine and who are aware that that Cabernet Franc has really sort of taken off in Long Island and the Finger Lakes across New York. But then, of course, there are others who have never heard of it. You hear Cabernet Franc, and they're just not familiar with it. But once they're in the tasting room, that's you have a captive audience, so to speak. I mean, you could begin to educate and just have them taste the wine. And but I mean, this was a bigger concern. We made our first varietal Cabernet Franc Pomanoc in 1998, and so 25 years ago, there was a bigger concern that since Cabernet Franc is not as well known as Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, was it going to sell as well? But today it's basically almost outselling our Merlot and our Cabernet Sauvignon.
Very cool. All right, before we move on to our flight, I'm going to show a short video. Bear with me while I switch my screens over. It's about 5 minutes. Really listen in on this one. I love this video. Met with a lot of different winemakers to put it together, and there's some really, really sharp tidbits throughout. And so I do hope you enjoy it. Let's get this going here. Get our audio. Okay. Okay. And Kareem, if you could just give me a thumbs up if you've got audio when the video comes through, okay?
If I had to pick one red vinifera that I really love from the Finger Lakes, it has to be Cab Franc.
On the red front, besides Merlot, more and more people are interested in celebrating Cabernet Franc, and that includes us. Cabernet Franc is an awesome grape variety for the east end of Long Island.
We are growing and making some absolutely stunning reds here in Niagara, showcased by our king, Cabernet Franc. We're blessed with these sand and gravel soils over limestone base that give us a particular characteristic of really exceptional fruit character.
It's one of my favorite varieties to grow in that every year presents a little bit different challenge, and I'm always trying to tweak our growing practices with it. You know, whether it's a crop load adjustment or how many leaves we're pulling or what time we're pulling the leaves, you can really have a huge effect on the fruit viticulturally just by changing things up a couple days or a few little practices here or there. And we absolutely love growing it. It's great.
So more of us started planting it, and it's a little touchy because of the erratic minimum winter temperatures. Some years we get 15 below once or twice, and some years we only get 2 or 3 below. It makes a world of difference to the Cabernet Franc vines.
Talk about cool climate and what makes a cool climate. For us, it's acidity, and that is our hallmark. That is, it's kind of who we are, and we embrace it. And Cabernet Franc is, I think, one of those reds that just needs that acid backbone. In most parts of the world, you know, it's a vit player, it's a blending grape. In our climate, Cab Sauvignon is the blending grape. So we've got 2 acres of Cab Sauvignon, we've got 20 acres of Cab Franc. And now 5 different clones and 4 different soil types. So really starting to use it to tease out the threads of terroir and the different expressions of the grape.
It tends to be a little bit lighter bodied, a little bit more acidity on the back end. And in cooler years is going to have a little bit more of that vegetal or bell pepper note that are traditional in the cooler climate Cab Franc.
We like to make sort of the lighter treble clef, bell ringing, high toned, light in color, but deep in character sort of wines from Cabernet Franc. And we also make, I think, you know, just world-class rosé from it as well.
So what we do in the vineyard, and this is all based on what Cornell did and shared with us all, is that by making your Cab Franc berries as exposed to the sun as possible as soon as you see berries, that is by shoot positioning and by leaf removal, we can get very ripe Cab Franc that is very a minimal amount of that green pepper vegetal character.
The methoxypyrazines that I think most people associate with Cabernet Franc, that green bell pepper, if you know what you're doing in the vineyard, you can really flip that script and turn it into a very positive component of the wines.
Here on our farm we have 6 different Cabernet Franc clones. Some highlights would be our clone 623 that we really like. That's a very big, juicy, jammy kind of clone. We're in a unique position with all these clones in our vineyard that our wineries that we sell to are able to kind of do some field blending almost and harvest them either all together or keep them separate and kind of see what different components and how much they might want to blend into the wines. It's really great to work with wineries that are so committed to highlighting clones as well as different vineyard sites, and we're just really fortunate to have a great group of winemakers at our disposal here in the Finger Lakes.
The style of Cab Franc here is not big, heavy, bold, jammy style of wine, so too much oak is going to make our Cab Franc a little bit out of balance. So our approach really is minimal use of oak generally, and not for a very long time.
The wine basically makes itself. We've aged it in French barrels, softened the tannins, and after about a year and a half, we're able to bottle it, and it makes a wonderful food accompaniment, much like the French wines, who are usually not over 13% alcohol. And I like a good California red, but at 15% alcohol, it's kind of difficult to pair with food.
It's really about balance, and our balanced approach in the vineyard. When those grapes are ready to come off, we're just looking to capture that in the bottle, and I think that makes the most complete wine, the most ageable wine, and the most representative of our vineyards in the vintage. For the last 10 years, we've been planting Cab Franc, and that will probably continue for the next 10 years.
Dang. What a cast of characters, huh?
That was great. Well done.
Okay, and so go back to our slides here. Yeah, no, it was good. I saw Kareem. I saw a lot of head nodding along the way, and I was like, okay, good. We're touching on the right points here. But these are the guys that have been working with this grape like yourself for decades, and yeah, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of passion behind it. And I'm curious to see, like, where can we go? There's always going to be, we always want more acclaim, right? There are areas in the state where we can plant more acreage, and I think we are. Do you see, more terroir exploration for this grape? Is there more clonal exploration that needs to be done with this grape? What's going to get us to the highest heights for Cab Franc?
Yes, I think it's what you just said. Further exploration of terroir and clonal selection, are going to be, I think, key variables going forward in sort of exploring what's possible with Cabernet Franc in New York. I think you have it on the slide here. A lot of us are using oak, but there's also, I've played around a little bit with a combination of oak and stainless steel myself. I've had excellent Cabernet Franc made entirely in concrete, and amphora too. I can see being, all those things, are going to factor in, I think, going into the future. And then you have, different wine styles like we talked about. For rosé, personally, it's my favorite variety for rosé. On Long Island, the rosé, there's been a rosé boom the last 15 years or so, or 20 years. It's been a while now. But it does really well in rosé. And then, of course, you can make something like a sparkling rosé as well. So there's all kinds of possibilities of how it can, we could see it playing out in the future.
Great. Well, that's a really nice segue into our first wine, which is the Lamoureux Landing. This is 2021 vintage, 12% alcohol, T23 Cab Franc. T23 originally referred to as Tank 23. This program for this wine has increased in popularity. As such, it is no longer just Tank T23 and quite popular. Last year, this was a decanter wine of the week. Since it's landed here in the UK, it's been incredibly popular, and for good reason. This wine is 100% stainless steel and 100% carbonic maceration. So that's really giving us this light color here. Almost, it's jewel toned. I absolutely love the look of this wine in the glass. Just gorgeous. And really just nice bright fruit characteristic, crunchy fruits, all that kind of strawberry bramble we were talking about, really nice. And then just a touch on the end where we're getting those pyrazines, that little bit of green. And I think that I say pyrazines a lot. It's the chemical kind of term for what we're tasting. For me, it's green, right? It's green. That's herbs, that's jalapeno, that's bell pepper, and I think it's important. Sometimes it can come through as more mineral driven with graphite and things like that. You have a Chinon and it's like you're chewing on a pencil. And so again, different ways to kind of use these intrinsic qualities of the grape to make really exciting wine. I understand that you don't have these first couple of wines. I apologize for that. So I'll taste through, and again, if you have anything to add, please do jump in. And also, folks, questions, please, if you have any questions for myself or Kareem, we might have some time at the end of the session to tackle them. And if not, we'll get to you offline for sure. Take advantage of the chat box or the Q&A, please. It's afternoon here, so I'm not going to spit. This is my only gig for the day. Lovely, really coming through on the nose with tart kind of bright berries. I get a really nice mineral note on the nose as well. On the palate, really soft tannins, texturally not super grippy at all, really, but you get the acid on the sides here, really getting you salivating, which is quite nice. I mean, this is damn near rosé, honestly. Have you ever worked, Kareem, with carbonic maceration at all, with these grapes, or with other red grapes?
A little bit. We've done like some partial carbonic. We make a range of wines at Pomanoc that we call minimalist, which, as the name implies, are made in a very minimalist way. I don't do or add anything to them at all. In fact, not even any sulfites. And so when we destem and do our sorting, it goes directly in a tank under CO2, and so it is sort of some partial carbonic, and then we start punching it down. And so, but yeah, I think it can be a very successful method and style.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, I don't need it to become our Beaujolais Nouveau, but I think the guys at Lamoureux are certainly onto something. And we got to hear from Josh Wigg on the video quite a bit, and that was wonderful. Again, 20 acres of Cabernet Franc planted on the east side of Seneca Lake there for these guys. So all estate grown fruit in here, and those guys are sustainability champions as well. So yeah, really love this wine. If you haven't had it, I highly encourage you to do so. Let's move on. Okay, moving into the Hudson River region, we have Fjord Vineyards Cabernet Franc, vintage 2020, coming in at 13.1% alcohol. This wine made by my friends Matt Spaccarelli and Casey Erdman, doing really cool things in the Hudson Valley with their Fjord winery here, playing with things like Albarino too, really fun. But lovely wine here. This one does spend time in French oak. Barrels are between kind of like 3 and 8 year old barrels, and you could do anywhere from 9 to 14 months depending on the vintage. 2020 was a particularly lovely vintage and a warm vintage, and so I expect we're a little higher on that scale in terms of our oak because we have the structure and the fruit to stand up to it. Let's get in there. Yeah, I mean, the oak note comes through as compared to the previous wine for sure, but in a really good way. It's woodsy spice. It's more of those wild berries, maybe a bit of balsamic as well, kind of thing going on there. It's really quite expressive. Yeah, you can't mistake that textural quality that you're also getting from that time in the oak barrels as well. But man, it's silky smooth, bright. It's got good tannins, more than our previous wine for sure. Feeling that grip on the tongue a little bit, but also the acidity again cranking out on the sides. I mean, just perfect food wine. Really fun red for sure. And what's nice, our first three wines here are 3 different vintages. So we started with 2021, we're in 2020 now, and then Kareem will go into 2019 for yours. Be great to just touch on a little kind of vintage variation there as well. You know, and I know that our winemakers, like I said, when it comes to vintage variation, it's a blessing and a curse, right? It is both, you know, what gets you out of bed every day, but also keeps you up at night. And so I think that makes for uniquely expressive wines. I think that, you know, you can really judge the quality of a producer by consistency in quality, not consistency in your results, but consistency in quality year after year, despite vintage variation. And so, you know, when I started my retail brand here in the UK, Good Wine, Good People, we really do try and focus on our producers, because and I don't stress terribly about vintage, because you're not going to get the same wine every time, but that you know, is exciting. We talk about the poetic, you know, snapshot of time and place in a bottle, and I think we should honor that, you know. And so places with vintage variation like New York State should be celebrated, not feared. Yeah. Any thoughts, Kareem?
I totally agree. I mean, and look at some of the most celebrated regions in the world, Bordeaux, Burgundy, I mean, the Loire Valley. I mean, they definitely have vintage variation, as do we. And as you said, I mean, you know, if you have a producer who you can sort of count on year in and year out, regardless of the vintage, to have a sort of pretty consistent style, that's showing, you know, the producer is working with what they've got. And one nice thing about the rosé, I'm sorry, I'm here in the cellar. I'm sorry if there's some background noise. We're making wine upstairs.
Are you in a working winery? God.
But the nice thing about having rosé become the category that it is today is it doesn't force us into making a red wine. If it's a lesser red wine vintage, those grapes are perfectly good for rosé. And so I mean, the point is that helps us achieve this sort of consistent style. And I can be more selective in a lesser vintage where I'm only going to use really the top lots for the red wine. And I can use more of the, you know, in a lesser vintage, more of that Cabernet Franc can be shifted into a rosé program.
Very good. As we go into our next wine, which is yours, the Pommenoc 2019 Cab Franc, I just wanted to say, you know, we had that video that really we had Christopher Tracy there from Channing Daughters from the South Fork, but woefully not as much Long Island representation in the voices there. I'm thrilled to say that on my last trip last month, and I did get to even speak with Kareem, I met over 24 winemakers in the span of just a few hours, and they all got on camera with me. And so I will say that just to kind of speak broadly for them, everyone's excited about Cabernet Franc. There was a lot of really positive things said. A lot of people, we got everyone together, and folks will kind of hear more about this project for the 50th anniversary as it kind of progresses. But we got 25, 26 winemakers all together at one winery, and after hanging out in the cellar, I just asked everyone to bring a bottle of wine, and a lot of Cab Franc showed up, and that was also exciting. I got to taste some really good wines, and I think that snapshot, you know, Kareem, it would actually be really funny to actually see if we could like get a list of what everybody showed up with and kind of break it down, right? I think we'd have some really interesting insights to see what people are pumped about. That's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about vintage 2019 one. Apologies for the typo.
So on Long Island, I mean, 2019 was really a wonderful vintage. We had enough heat and sun, you know, to fully ripen the crop. And in particular, September of 2019, if anyone was in New York, you know, New York City or Long Island, if you remember, it was just like one long sunny day. It barely rained the whole month of September. And of course, that's a key ripening period for Cabernet Franc, which we usually harvest in October. And that's what happened in 2019. It was harvested in mid-October. And so, yeah, you know, I think the 2019 vintage is, you know, one of the best we produced, at least in the last 5 years prior to that. And this is, I'd say, a pretty classic style for this label that we produce at Pommenoc, where I'm deliberately looking for neutral French oak barrels because I don't want much of an oak contribution. I just want the benefit of the barrel aging. And the wine will spend about 12 to 14 months in barrels for this. I think it was 14 months for the 2019. And it's finished with a screw cap. And as a result, we had very, very little sulfites. And that also helps it right off the bottling line, being able to, to get it out the door and get it into the marketplace quickly and have it show well.
It's tasting great. I mean, you get hit with this really kind of burst of freshness right at the front, which is really, I mean, it perked me up. It was exciting, which is great. I think I'm seeing across our flight here, just a bit of the bottle age coming through. It's still fresh as a daisy, right? But I just get a little bit more development out of the fruit where it's not just fresh or even underripe berries, where we're kind of fully mature fruit, even into slightly kind of macerated, overripe fruit, not in a sugars way by any sense, just more kind of preserved, or even it's a bit more of that kind of brambly stuff we were talking about. It's rustic. I'm really enjoying it.
Great.
Yeah, it's got a great nose.
And you mentioned it earlier, Dan. I mean, these wines are all about balance. They have moderate alcohol, they've got good acidity, and they've got a tannin structure that is sufficiently firm for having it with a whole range of foods, and it makes it a great all-around wine. You can have it with food, without food, and it's hence its popularity.
What is your experience with longevity of these wines? Right, how far back can you go with our Cabernet Francs? Have you had experiences with other Long Island producers with kind of back vintage Cab Franc? And what can consumers look forward to if they were to, let's say, buy a whole case and put some aside?
I would say it's not unlike what you see around the world. The better vintages are going to have better longevity, and the lesser vintages won't. But I'm talking 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, the first producer on Long Island was the Hargrave vineyard. And I've had some old Hargrave wines, including Cabernet Franc, that had, 30, 40 years of bottle age that, were hit or miss, but there were some hits there. And even in our own lineup, like I said, we started making varietal Cabernet Franc in '98, and same thing, in the stronger vintages, those wines are still, they've obviously gone into a more developed or aged character. They've lost their primary fruitiness, which is what you would expect. But they do have excellent longevity, especially with the screw cap. I don't want to get on a big sermon about screw caps, but the screw cap preserves the wine extremely well, and we just sell our wines too young, and most producers around the world do, because most people drink wines young. But that said, they, like you said, the best thing is to get a case, and that way you can revisit that wine every so often and see how it's progressing. But I wouldn't be worried about I have to drink it within the first 10 years, depending on the vintage. If it's not the ripest vintage, then I would drink it sooner rather than later. But if it was a ripe vintage, I mean, it should have some good staying power.
Yeah, I think for those that are on this webinar today that are spending a lot of time in tasting rooms with their consumers, this is an important point, right? And it's important for those folks to understand the vintage variation to guide sales in that way, because the best vintage is when it's gone, and I think that the longevity of New York State wines, particularly reds and whites, honestly, is something that we can continue to explore, right? And from an economic standpoint, it's difficult for the wineries to take on that responsibility to sit on wine, but if we can communicate effectively to consumers, I think there's a big opportunity there. Go ahead, talk. I'm just going to say I left it in the fridge.
Okay. I was just going to say, in those ripe vintages, the explanation for the longevity, if it's not obvious, is the tannins. I mean, in a riper vintage, there's just so much more tannin in the wine. And also, you know, in the vintages where you have that phenomena where you have cooler nights and you end up with a little higher acidity and lower pH and tannin. I mean, that's going to give you the chemistry for longevity.
Yep.
And then there's other aspects like I talked about, the screw cap, or depending on what kind of cork you use or whatever closure you use, that are also going to impact longevity and the addition of sulfites and so forth. But bottom line, I think there are plenty of examples that demonstrate the potential for longevity in New York Cabernet Franc.
Awesome. We've got one more wine to go. And so last call, if anyone wants to jump in for any questions that we can end on, please do. We're doing good on time today. We're getting better at this thing, 3 weeks in. And so our last wine here, we have the Kelby James Russell Signature Series with his dry rosé of Cabernet Franc from the Finger Lakes in 2021. And just a beautiful wine. I love the color on this one. It's just, it's a go-to. I did reach out to Kelby. I got some notes from him directly. I want to share those with you now. I apologize. Let's find them. Here we go. So for the 2021, which coming in again, 12.5% alcohol, he said the big thing is 72 hours on skins at very cold temperatures, 2 degrees Celsius, which math is probably around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And the juice is constantly being run across the skins by gentle pumping. That gives it a pop of color, but more importantly, gives the wine a lot of mid-palate weight and body, which is why I can ferment it bone dry. So he has not left several grams of residual sugar behind to counterbalance how austere it would otherwise be. And I think that's a huge kind of point for this wine is that mid-palate weight and yet the complete absence of sugar. It's really impressive stuff. I mean, on the nose, it's a beautiful wine. Exactly what you want out of a rosé. It's got that really just kind of fresh strawberries, touch of kind of a lactic creamy note. Yeah, I mean, it's strawberries and cream. It's really great acidity, great texture. Like you said, mid-palate weight is full of red fruit characteristics. Really quite bright on your palate. It pops. It's an exciting kind of journey all the way through. Again, salivating, great. All of our wines on this flight, acidity has been a hallmark, and for good reason. And again, this is just another one of those pairing wines that can do so much. I'm thinking, I mean, this is going to go the spectrum. This is going to go from salads, right? This is going to go into fish. Your fattier fishes, your salmon would be just perfect. I mean, also you look at the color, and I think salmon's just a great kind of visual pairing for this wine as well. All the way through your poultry. For sure. I can even see this with something like German sausages, where you've got that really kind of fattier, richer meats. Not necessarily like full-on ribeye steak, but something like a kind of more delicate but rich sausage would be really quite fun. Gosh, just hot dogs and hamburgers, really. quite a fun wine. Fantastic. Okay, we've got just a few minutes left. I do want to touch on just a few more points, and then I'll give Kareem an opportunity to share his closing thoughts. We have touched on this on our previous seminars, so I'm not going to spend too much time. But again, sustainability, it's in the word. It's sustainable, right? We want to have generational growth with our wine programs, and that's how we're going to continue to thrive. And so sustainability, I believe, to be the minimum. This is your entry level for a successful business model, looking long term into the future. And that's how our wines just get better and better. So the New York State Wine and Grape Foundation Sustainability Program is super cool. And if you don't know, now you know. And then further study, I do encourage everyone. I think it's really important to get outside of New York State. And Cab Franc's a great grape to do that with. And so, you know, we're talking about context, how New York State's Cabernet Francs fit in the world wine scene. And so tasting hyper local doesn't always do our wines justice, right? And so solidifying our position among the Cab Franc leaders, I think try your French Cab Francs, try, you know, there's California ones too. I've had excellent Cabernet Franc from Argentina, different regions within France. Gosh, where else? There's Cab Franc in Hungary, Cab Francos should be explored as well. And so, yeah, get out there. It's a whole wide world of wine. We've got a wonderful value proposition here in New York State. Our Cabernet Francs offer incredible value. We boast a wide breadth of styles, as discussed, with the signature of the world-class cool climate that New York State boasts. We have fresh, lively wines, moderate alcohol, lots of flavor, lots of flavor. We do not have a ripeness issue. And so, you know, that's what we should be shouting about. Compared to West Coast regions, our wines are very budget friendly for the average consumer. And with the overwhelming majority of our producers being small and family owned, you're getting an artisan product rooted in unique and fascinating terroir. Yes, I'm going to end every session with that line. I think it should be, you know, our you know, our flag right here, you know. It's we don't have any bulk producers, right? There's no monsters here. They're all artisans, and we have special terroir that is should be celebrated. So a few more points. New York State's cool climate regions distinctly suited for premium Cabernet Franc production, and it unites our diverse regions with a common thread, right? New York State reds, people should think Cab Franc. Acreage and demand are also on the rise. We have a fruit-forward, lighter, and alcohol higher acidity style, which is unique. And then finally, as we've said, some really fun examples. I'm hungry now. New York Cab Francs are fantastic with food, with the spectrum of styles: white, rosé, oaked, and unoaked. There's something for everyone and every meal. Kareem, any last thoughts, my friend? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I mean, I think you covered it. I mean, the one thing that came to mind listening to you just now was that you know, I think in all of our regions there's so much local produce that's produced that we can enjoy with Cabernet Franc, whether it's cheeses or local meats and vegetables, and so it just you know, you get hungry listening to all these potential pairings that you talk about. But we can do that with New York produce, and we do, and we love to celebrate that.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for joining us once again this week. We will see you next week for sparkling wines, another awesome flight, and a lot to discuss. I will be joined by none other than Megan Frank from Dr. Constantine Frank, Vinified Wine Cellars, and I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great rest of your day, rest of your week. Keep on fighting the good fight. Thanks, Kareem. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.